What's up, everybody? This is the Neighborhood Money Podcast, a video podcast here to help you build a life you deserve. I'm Cavan, that's Drew. Drew, man,
Hello.
this is my second take of the intro. We've been doing this now for, like almost a year, and I got our slogan wrong. I don't even know what's going on. I don't even know what day of the week it is, man. I hope you're ready to rock this podcast because obviously I can't even do our intro right.
That brings up a really good point. How long have we been doing this? When did we start talking? Was that in August or July?
I think this is going to be episode 47, if I remember correctly. I think last week was 46.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got it right here on my computer. I could probably check it out real fast. Yep. So last week was 45. So this is 46.
46 plus we had a couple weeks of preparation. So it's just roughly, it's coming up here on the year.
We're going to have to do something special for the year anniversary of the Neighborhood Money Podcast because I'm looking forward to that one. But I think we'll have to do some brainstorming. You know, I know we already have, but we'll see what we can come up for our listeners here.
Yeah, exactly what we can come up with will be interesting, but I think we're on the track of figuring something out. We're going to be a little secretive about it because it might be something very cool, but we'll come to that when we do. But today, I think we should just stick to the statistics. I stumbled on that.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter. I mean, I didn't even remember our intro, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, so today is all about crazy personal finance stats that everyone needs to know about. But before we even dive in, Drew, I first got to give a plug to our podcast. It's the support plug. So if you guys find value in this podcast, you can help us out in a couple of ways. One, head out to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review. Leave us a review, letting everyone else know that this podcast is worth listening to. And if you're listening on YouTube, consider hitting that subscribe button and liking the video because it gets pushed out to more and more people. And then drop us a comment, letting us know what type of future episodes you'd like to see, or if you see anything in this episode that you really thought like, oh wow, like I never knew that before, you know, or just drop by and say hi. All right, that's enough for plug-in the support. Drew, let's dive into the crazy personal finance stats that we came up with. So Drew, we've got 7 different stats here today. It's going to range from budgeting, your emergency fund, debt, making those major purchases, really all across the spectrum. And hopefully not only can we bring these stats to the listener to really say, you know, there are some sobering statistics out there when it comes to personal finance, but I hope that we can also bring a lot of value and at least providing our 2 cents on how, if one of our listeners is in the situation that these stats are talking about, that they can hopefully get themselves out of that situation and start building that life that they truly do deserve. So Drew, let's start out with budgeting, the budgeting category. So our first stat of the day is that 64% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And this is a survey that came out of CNBC. And that is absolutely incredible stat. You know, over half, 64% exactly of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck.
I think a lot of this stems from you don't really know what else to do with your money sometimes. I mean, obviously there's certain situations where you're so caught up in the debt and your expenses that you don't have time to take a step back and really think about where your money's going. But I think it's another side of the coin where there wasn't the education on it. So when you grow up, it was always get educated, get a job, and make a paycheck. But they never really said what to do with that paycheck. So for me, it kind of seems like when people got a paycheck in their mail, or not in the mail anymore, it'd be in their bank account.
True. It's 2022, man.
Yeah, I can't even.
You don't get checks in the mail anymore.
No, you don't. But I just feel like once that money's in there, it's there to be spent. And I think that is a horrible habit to get into. And that this is a cycle that's becoming is just, I have money. What do I do with money? I spend money. And I think that mindset and that frame of mind has to change. And I'm hoping that's one of the things that this podcast can do is the money isn't always meant to be spent now. It can be spent in the future, but it's all about building that money now so you don't have to worry about the next paycheck.
You know, Drew, a lot of this does stem though from overspending. And so spending on those future goods like a car, a house, maybe you have credit card debt and all that stuff starts to add up, specifically when times are really good for you, when you have income coming in, or maybe you have more income coming in than you used to have. And that can kind of get you in trouble if you're not really careful with where you're spending your money. Because it's very easy in today's day and age. Drew, you and I were just talking before we started recording about just home improvement projects and the amount of money that they cost now. And if you think about spending money on those big purchases, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, this is going to be $300 a month, a new car is going to be $500 a month. Those things can kind of add up, and if you're not careful, all of a sudden you're going to have all of those payments and plus your other spending, not in addition to the debt you're taking out, eat up everything that you take home, and it's going to make that your month to month living very stressful and very very tight. And so I think that's where budgeting really really comes into play. And that's, again, we talk about all the time how budgeting does seem very restrictive at times, but it's really not. It really provides you that sense of freedom, that reduce of stress on a month to month basis, because you know where your money is going, and it's not getting to the end of the month and being like, oh, how can I now, how am I going to afford this next bill? Budgeting hopefully does help you with that.
Budgeting is definitely an item that we've talked about so much on this podcast, but I think it's the importance of it. And as you said, people can feel like it is very restrictive. And maybe that is on top of why they're living paycheck to paycheck is they don't they don't think they can be any more restrictive with their paycheck because their money's just going in and it's going out to exactly where they need to go. So, but I think the budget itself is so awesome because you're able to actually see you're reading a book of your money is the way I kind of always look at it. You can see these dollars and cents and these vendors and suppliers that you're going to, but it may be in a list form, but it actually tells a story of what you did that month, and it gives you a chance to see what I really should have done that month or what I can improve on in the upcoming months. And I think it's a very important tool.
Drew, I can hear some listeners probably thinking or maybe even saying out loud, well, why don't they people just focus on making more money? And that might seem like the right path forward. And don't get me wrong, making more money is always a good thing. But it, out of the same study out of CNBC, those that make over six figures, 48% of those households live paycheck to paycheck as well. And so the amount of money that you're bringing in doesn't necessarily mean that you are better off on a month to month basis. And that's because you have that lifestyle creep. You have typically, as you make more money, now you're buying nicer, larger things, and that monthly paycheck to paycheck is still occurring. And so I think, regardless of the income you're making in, you've got to lock down your budget, because that's truly going to give you that sense of freedom and, just completely get rid of that, living paycheck to paycheck, living that stressful life.
As you get more and more revenue and income into your household, you might be having nicer things, and but that doesn't mean you're necessarily not living paycheck to paycheck. And I think that's a big thing to take out of that is you could be potentially one day away from losing it all if you didn't have like the multiple forms of income coming in that diversified your income, and you didn't have a solid budget set up, you didn't know where your money was going. You could have one bad day, whether health reasons or you had a bad day at work or some incident. And if you only have one source of income coming in and you're living paycheck to paycheck with all these nice things, those could all go away very quickly. So being able to put yourself in a good position, a budget allows you to do that. And doesn't matter if you're making 30,000 a year or $200,000 a year. You have to be able to have the foundation and know where your money's going. I really like emergency funds, and these are another item where they might seem intimidating, but emergency fund doesn't have to be at 3 months, 6 months, 12 months yesterday. I mean, it's just a build up towards that. And if you're able to set aside some money throughout the week, throughout the month, you can slowly get that up to, say, that $1,000 emergency. And that could be as easy as, you know, using that $1,000 could be as easy as you maybe getting a fender bender and $500 your deductible goes like that. Or you end up getting some sickness and you had to go into the hospital and maybe your deductible is all the way up to like $8,000. And if that comes out of nowhere, it's very tough to just take that chunk of money out of your paychecks to paycheck month to month and be able to spend for that. So being able to prepare, and I think that's like a big thing that we've talked about in this podcast is being able to prepare for your future and plan for your future. An emergency fund is no different, where you're able to set aside small chunks of money early on, so then at the time that you have to use it, it's there. You're not scrambling for it. You're not adding extra stress onto your life. You're able to use that money and then eventually build it back up, because the chances of something piling up on top of each other day after day is probably not as likely. So being able to prepare and keep setting stuff aside, I think, is very important.
One thing to always remember too with an emergency fund is that this isn't an investment, right? Somebody might be thinking, well, if I have 6 months of my monthly expenses in an emergency fund sitting in cash, I know that is high inflation. Isn't that just going to get eaten up? And the answer is, yeah, it is, because you're not making any money on your emergency fund because it's sitting in a savings account, or maybe you have it in a high yield savings account where you're getting 0.5%, maybe 0.6% interest per year. But that's not really the purpose of it. It's not to make money. It's really the purpose of it is so that if you need the money now, you can get access to it and you aren't worried about the market volatility. So say if you actually had your emergency fund in like an S&P 500 index, and all of a sudden the index drops by 20% and you need to withdraw from that, well, now you have 20% less money to cover those expenses. And so that's why it's so important to not look at this as an investment, but really it's just an amount of money that's going to be available for you to pay for those unexpected expenses. You know that you're going to lose out on returns because of you're not investing, plus you're in inflation. So you're actually losing value with this money, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day because it's truly just for those unexpected expenses.
Yeah, these emergency funds are not supposed to be that investment. What we want and what we're looking for is short-term liquid cash is what we need. It's We don't want to be jumping through hoops of selling stocks, selling real estate, selling bonds, selling etc., and waiting for your money to clear and then transfer from that account to your bank account to then be able to send to whatever it needs to be. We want to be able to act quickly. We want to be able to have that money already set aside. And even though we may be losing money on inflation and the purchasing power of it, we're worried about getting that stress and that emergency out of our way today so that we don't have to continue to worry about it, paying it off for the next 5, 6, 7, 12 months.
Absolutely. And that naturally brings us to the next one, Drew. So nice transition there. All around debt. So if you have the emergency fund, you can really limit the amount of debt you need to take out to cover those expenses. And actually, when you look across all Americans, the average credit card balance that people hold on a month to month basis, meaning the amount of money that they aren't paying off and are paying interest on, is $5,500 or thereabout. And, that might seem like not a whole lot of money to some, or maybe it seems like a lot of money to others, but that's $5,500 that they're paying 20% interest on per year. And then, Drew, if I break that down even a little bit further, and this again gets to the lifestyle creep that we've already talked about in this episode, if you look specifically at college grads who more likely have higher income, statistically speaking, their average credit card balance is almost $8,000 per month that they carry on their credit card. And then, even above that, if you look at the top 10% of households, the average credit card balance that they have is 12.6 thousand or $12,600 that they have continuously on their monthly credit card balance. So it doesn't matter again how much money you are actually making. Having credit card balance is a true issue for many, many Americans.
Yeah, it's very easy to just swipe a card. There's no doubt about that, and I don't know if it's something where you have your statement and it just says this is your minimum payment, and then it just constantly just put a chunk towards it or minimum payment because you don't feel the need to pay it off, or if it's something where you just don't really realize how much this credit card is actually creeping up, and then with these 20 to 24% interest rates, it can be, 100, 200, $300 that are you getting paid interest every single month, but most likely that's getting charged on your credit card. So if you weren't looking at the credit card, you're not seeing that, and then within a couple months, what could have been your emergency fund has been going to your credit card interest. And I think that's kind of an interesting point to take with credit cards. And I think just really that knowledge, again, going back to education, especially when we're saying people coming out of college, it might be something where they weren't exactly sure how maybe the student loans worked, and then the credit card is still kind of an extension of that, and they just kind of feel like, oh, as I get more and more pay, as I get more and more pay increases, and I can pay more and more towards a credit card, and they just maybe just look at it as another loan instead of actually a line of credit that has high interest yields.
So there's two things to really be concerned about when it comes to credit cards, or just to be aware about. One is the minimum payments that the credit card is asking you to pay is not what you want to pay, because that what that means is so the minimum is the amount. So say like their minimum they give you is $25 per month. That just means that if you pay $25, they will not report you to the crediting agencies. But that doesn't mean that they're not charging interest. So I think that's one thing just to be aware of is even if you pay the minimum, you still are going to be paying interest on the amount of money that is outstanding. And then, Drew, the second thing, and this one is such a big myth in the personal finance space, is that in order to have good credit, you need to have some sort of revolving standing line of credit, meaning that you need to carry a balance on your credit card. And that is not the case. Actually, if you have a balance on your credit card month to month, that's actually going to be negatively impacting your credit score and your credit report. So just those two things you need to be crystal clear on when it comes to credit card. Make sure that you're paying off that credit card in full each and every month. Make sure that you're paying it off probably more than once per month, because even if you pay it off every single month, if you have a high balance on the date that they pull your credit card information to report to the crediting agencies, you could get knocked from your credit score. And actually, that just happened to me recently. I lost 25 points on my credit score because I didn't pay off a higher balance. We had a bigger purchase and I didn't pay off the balance and it knocked me for it. So, just be very clear. You might get knocked from a credit score standpoint, even though you're paying it off in full. But Drew, I'm glad you brought up the student loans because that's number 4 on our list. And the student loans is a huge problem in America. We talked about it with James, the fact that there's $1.6 trillion of student loans out there. And regardless of your views on how that problem should be taken care of, it's pretty sobering to have people that are 20, 21, 22 years old coming out with $40,000 worth of student loan debt. So that's the average student loan debt for college grads. And starting out $40,000 in the hole can really set you back.
And I don't know what the date of these statistics are, but the way student loans or student prices, higher education prices are going, that this number is only going to be increasing. And the way people are constantly wanting to live a certain lifestyle, even when they're in college and not making any type of money, I think this is going to even increase this. So maybe part of social media will be pushing these increased student loans because, as we talked with James last week, he was saying his wife when she was going through, a lot of her student loans came through, or what she used them for were actually shopping. So she would be taking out larger student loans because she'd just have to worry about paying them back later. And then next thing you know, these student loans are increasing by significant amounts because they're not necessarily going just towards education, which prices are increasing significantly, but also the cost of living, which is increasing significantly. And then just social media presence of just wanting to be keeping up with the Joneses is going to be making this number increase even more. So if this was a very recent statistics of $40,000, I wouldn't be surprised if within a year or two this thing jumps up to, 60, $70,000.
And this is just undergraduate. So this, I think this was from the beginning of this year, done on a 2021 study. And you're totally right. It's it is expected to increase. And so that's why I think it's so important now, more so than before, to talk to your loved ones that are going into college and say, hey, you need to figure out what type of degree you're going to get for the money you're paying and what actually is going to be the return on that investment. And I think you really have to look at it as an investment. And so if you're paying $40,000 to $50,000 for a degree that is not marketable in the marketplace, it's going to be really hard to pay that back. Now, if you're paying 30 grand to have a really high paying job right out of school, maybe it's a good idea. But I think it's really important now to look at, okay, what am I going to school for and how much is it actually costing? And then what can I do to really limit those student loans? Can I work more? Can I apply for more scholarships? Drew, it's pretty crazy. There is an endless amount of scholarships each and every year that do not get claimed. I should actually pulled up the statistic, but it's in the millions of dollars that are of unclaimed scholarships. So there's a lot of options out there to reduce the amount of student loans you have or just the cost of college. Another thing is to look at maybe community college is the way to go for the first couple of years. But there's a lot of different options out there to reduce this expense. And, speaking from experience, if I could have gone back, I wish I would have reduced the amount of loans I came out of school with because it did have a setback, in those early days when I was first getting started in my adult life.
Looking at student loans, I know I kind of talk about there's not enough education out there for finances. It's kind of ironic because it's education, people going into more education, but there's not the financial literacy part of it. And I was just thinking here, maybe we should try putting together some type of a small, quick course to be able to give to people coming out of high school and just talk about the top points of where your money's going with your student loan and how it actually can affect you when you end up leaving the actual higher education. I know there's been a lot of talk about some people may be saying, well, if our student loans get forgiven, then I don't have to really worry about it. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. I think Milton Friedman said that. But then it raises another point too: is if they do forgive your loans, what are the people coming up after you gonna do? Are they gonna be getting free education or are they gonna have to be paying for it? So if we can educate the next generation, maybe they can continue to teach people coming up. So even if their loans do get forgiven, they still have an idea of why and what their money would have been spent on.
So if your credit cards or student loans, or maybe it's any sort of debt, is really weighing you down, now is a good time to get on a debt repayment plan. And there's a couple of options that you could consider. There's the debt avalanche, meaning that you pay off the highest interest loans first and you work your way down the line. And then you can flip that and do the debt snowball. That's what my family did to pay off our loans. And that's to list your debts from smallest to largest. Start with the smallest, pay that off, and then work your way up to the largest. And we won't go into full detail on either of those. Maybe Drew, we can do an episode in the future around debt repayment plans. But those are just a couple of options for you to look into if debt is really weighing you down. So Drew, let's move on to number 5. And so this 5 and 6 are really around major purchases. So major purchase around a house and major purchase around autos. And we both know, and our listeners are probably well aware of the massive increase in the housing market, the increase in the used car market, the fact that it's very challenging to get a vehicle at all right now. It's gotten a little better, but it's still hot. But so number 5 is, and Drew, this one actually blew my mind. So at least here in Minnesota, and I'm pretty sure nationwide, housing prices have gone up in the last couple of years by about 30 or so percent, which is crazy to say because you should think about housing markets rising roughly with the rate of inflation, so about 3 to 4%. So housing prices have just ballooned. But here's the actual statistic for number five: the cost of buying a home. So not just the price of the house, but also adding in the interest you're paying each and every month. So think about your mortgage, your insurance, and all of that stuff that comes with actually buying a house is up 74% in the last 2 years.
If I can add on a statistic to this, and if for anybody that's a continuing listener, they've already heard this one, but that statistic, it was back in like the 2010s, the percentage of your mortgage payment compared to your salary was roughly 16%. And now in 2021 and 2022, this mortgage payment is taking up about 34% of your take home or of your salary. So just that jump there, it's almost doubling in less than a decade, or probably less than a couple of years, really. That the amount of money just in your mortgage payment, just your principal and interest, is taking up close to 34% of your income. And that is a very significant number because if anybody's heard in that same episode, you wanted to almost keep your whole household expenses around maybe that 30%. So just having the mortgage and interest at that 34%, it just shows how drastically high the prices have become.
So, Drew, I think that's a really good thing to bring up again is my rule of thumb and something that we've talked about in the past is you should have your living expenses. I shouldn't say living, your housing living expenses around that 25 to 30% of your take home pay. And that's really to allow you to have more room for other things, such as investing, for example, for the long term for your retirement, or for having more funds available for entertainment, vacations, all the fun stuff of living. And so, we are in a crazy market. We just got done a couple weeks ago with, should you buy a house in 2022? So I think it's more important now than ever to really think critically around if you are buying a house, does it fit within your budget? Does it fit within those guardrails of 25 to 30%? Especially when you take into account insurance, taxes, and all of that stuff. Very important now because you don't want to be house broke because it causes stress. It causes a reduction in the amount of money you're able to invest for retirement, which may in fact delay retirement. And a lot of people look forward to those retirement years, and it would be such a shame if you got to 60, 65 and you had to work an extra 5 to 10 years just because you didn't think as critically now when buying that house than maybe you should have. And so it's just really important right now to make sure that you're crunching the numbers, even if you're not the number person.
Houses are a huge, definitely a very big purchase. And right now in this market, I know in that podcast we had, I just don't know if buying the house, like, I don't know what shoes you're in, for the person listening, but it's like if you didn't have to buy a house, this is not a great time to buy a home. And if you are looking to buy that home, I want you to also think about what you're going to be doing in the future. Are you going to be staying in the same job? Do you want to move up? Do you want to move to a different city? And if you're not sticking in that one certain area, I would hold off on that house and try searching for something in different surrounding areas, or that job that you potentially want to get. Try working for that, and then that housing market may be better. Even if you were able to save yourself $50,000 on a house by moving locations for taking the same pay in the area you want to be in, that could be much more worthwhile than jumping into a house because you feel obligated to, just for you to be at a job that you're only going to be there for a couple of years.
And Drew, another major purchase, so bringing us to number six on our list, is the good old automobile. And actually, this is one of the things that I'm probably the most passionate about. Maybe passion is the wrong word, but I think I have pretty strong feelings when it comes to cars. I don't buy new cars anymore. And that's because the average car loan per month right now is $644. So that's $644 that you're paying for a depreciating asset. That's crazy. And the price of a new car, uh, the average price of a new car right now is $46,000, which, both of those numbers, whether it's $644 per month or $46,000 for a depreciating asset, is incredibly big.
I hate to put you on the spot here, Cab, but you seem pretty passionate about this subject. In this current auto market, do you think if somebody's looking to buy a new vehicle, does it make more sense to buy a brand new vehicle or a used one when the used prices are 35% year over year inflated, and a new
Yep.
car still might be inflated as well around like the 25 to 30%, but you're still going to have probably the same depreciation you would on a new car, but on that used car, that one, if the market comes back down to reality, is going to be significantly less than what you paid for it and what your outstanding loan is for that car. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Man, it's so tricky right now, and I totally get it. The fact that used car, I always say like the 3 to 4 years is a sweet spot. That's not the case right now because used cars are more expensive. And so I think, as much as it sucks to say, well, one is delay. Like, if you can delay on buying a new car, but if you can't, and if you're forced to buy a car right now, I think you go older. I think you find that car that is cheaper, that gets the job done for now, and maybe you drive it for a couple years, and sure, maybe you lose out on 10% of the car's value because of the market corrects itself, but 10% of 6 grand and 10% of 20 grand is considerably different, right? And so I truly think that if you can delay, but if you have to buy a car, like if you have to, then I think you just look for a car that is a little bit cheaper, a little bit older, that gets the job done. And hopefully in a year, two, maybe three, the market corrects itself. And then you can go back to the good old rule of thumb of 3 to 4 year used car gets you to that sweet spot.
Yeah, I like that. That's a pretty good thought on this area because I just battle with that when I look at these car prices right now. And maybe you just need that beater to get you from point A to point B if you need a car to buy a new one because your other one just crapped out on you, then that might be the realm. You just get something cheaper, or that might be the realm because you might get something cheaper, but then you're able to constantly save up for when the market corrects itself, and then you will be in a position then to go for that vehicle you want. But it's going to take a little bit of sacrifice in the short term of 1 to 3 years, probably.
It always comes back to the old adage of, I need to like trade in my car so I get the most out of it, right? Well, I think, that's, in my opinion, is not a really good way to think about it, right? Because you're trading up to then pay depreciation. And I think right now you're going to lose out regardless of what you buy. So I would rather lose out on less money than lose out on more and be out less in the long run. So, I think regardless of your situation, I more than likely people can delay their car buying. They probably can make what vehicles they have work. But there is those instances whether maybe you have another child and you no longer can fit all your kids in a car, or a car gets out on you, whatever it might be. But if you can delay. But I think, Drew, if you do buy a new car, or new to you car, whether it's used or new, I think it's still important to follow the general guidelines of the 24/10 rule. And that's having 20% down to buy the car, at least 20% down to buy the car, finance it no more than 4 years, and keep your total transportation costs per month to be 10% of your take home pay or less. And if you do that, then you put yourself in a really good position to be financially successful over the long term. And I think you can be less strict around how old your car is or how much it's appreciated within the used car market, as long as it fits within that 24/10 rule.
24/10 rule, great benchmark. I love benchmarks because they're not the golden rule for me by any means, but they're a great spot to look at the purchase that you're going for, in this case, an automobile, and you can say, this is about what I need to be around. And then you can tweak it from there. But you always need a starting point, at least in my brain. So I like to have a starting point. These benchmarks, these little rules of thumbs are great, but they're not the golden rule. And I think that's something to take home with you as well, is even though there can be this 24/10 rule, it's not the end all be all. It's a place for you to start your search to see what you can actually afford to help you be financially successful moving forward.
You know, Drew, I'm going to move us to the next in the final statistic here, number 7. But as you were talking there, I was refreshing my memory of what it was. And I just realized that 1 through 7 has, by happenstance, there's by no means that we organize it this way, but it has fallen in a nice progression of beginner finance as you work your way down your journey throughout your life. And so we started with budgeting, we went to an emergency fund, we went to student loans and debt, bigger purchases, and now the final one is retirement savings, and more so how much money people have in their retirement accounts. And so number 7 is the median retirement accounts in the United States is $97,000. And maybe that doesn't mean much to you right now, but let me give you a couple other statistics to go with that might be a little bit more eye opening. And so it is expected right now in 2022 that you need roughly $1 million to retire and retire comfortably. That's on average. Obviously it depends on how much you want to spend in retirement, but you need around $1 million to retire comfortably. And so the median retirement account right now is 97. Well, that's across all workers. If we look at just strictly the individuals that are close to or at retirement age, their retirement accounts on average is in the 200 to $300,000. That means that on average, Americans have about 20 to 30% of the amount of money that they need to actually retire comfortably.
I like the first thing that jumps out at, or the first thing that jumps out at me here is the 97K being a median. I think that's something that I want to just put out there and just say a lot of people might see that number and see, oh, that seems so much lower than what I've seen and what I've Googled. And a lot of times you'll see an average out there. And most of the times, an average is not a great indicator for this amount, because there are people that are very, very high income earners and that have a bunch saved away in retirement really skew these numbers. So that's the first thing that kind of jumps out at me. The next thing that jumps out at me is the amount that's still left, or that's left in the people close to retirement age. And I think a lot of that in my mind comes and stems from the only way they have invested has been through an employer. And I think a lot of the times when it's through an employer, you tend to put off that initial setting up that retirement account. So you may be working there for 5 years and being like, oh, I said I was going to go into this 401k, so I may be doing that, or I should do that. And then you wait like another year, and then you've just lost out on 6 years just because you're kind of working, you're getting your paycheck, you're used to it, and you didn't set the retirement account up right away. So I think first thing there is, if you start that new job, set up that 401k. So the time that that money's taken out of your paycheck, it's already going to retirement. You're already learned to live off that income. The second side of this is, I think you should find a way to automate some of your retirement on the side, whether that be an Roth IRA or traditional IRA, or you just wanted to trade in a normal brokerage account. And they've made it so easy now for the normal retail individual to go onto a brokerage account, set up one of these IRAs, IRS, sectioned off tax advantage plans, and being able to actually automate that. I think being able to automate that, if you don't want to be somebody that's very active in that, is a great thing to do. And it just stuff that's supplemental. It gives you a feeling that you know where your money is going. It gives you a feeling that you're part of this and you're invested, and not monetarily, but actually emotionally and physically. And so I think finding ways to not only go through an employer sponsor plan, but try to find ways outside of that can help raise this number up as well. And it kind of gives you more of an understanding of where you actually want your money to go instead of trusting somebody completely.
I absolutely love the automation part of it. I think that is probably the biggest thing. It's stop procrastinating, get it automated, and then learn to live on the amount of money you're actually bringing home. Because when you automate it, you don't actually see that money, and it just sits there behind the scenes, growing, compounding, so that you can retire comfortably. So, a couple of things, Drew, when it comes to retirement, I think it's important to talk about general rules of thumb you talk about the different type of accounts that you should use. So I always view it as in this order is the way that you should use these accounts. Obviously, this isn't financial advice. This is just what myself and my family does. But you should look at if you have an employer sponsored plan, you want to invest up to the match. So you get that full match. Most likely, it's going to be in a traditional 401k. If they offer you a Roth 401k, use that. I think Roth is best. Then I go over to a Roth IRA. I max that out, and then I go back to the employer 401k plan to get up to the 15% recommendation of retirement spending. And so then, Drew, I'm glad you brought up the brokerage account because then, in addition to the 15%, I think this is where you can start getting a little bit more creative. You can start looking at maybe investing in taxable accounts so you can leverage or use that money earlier, or maybe you want to put more money into like a Roth 401k if you have that option at work. So it's really up to you, but I really think that you need to take advantage of employer matches to the full because you get 100% return instantly when you're using those accounts. Make sure you're leveraging that Roth IRA because that's going to be tax free, baby. And Drew, you and I both love tax free money. And then beyond, and make sure that you're at least investing 15% if you can get up to the 20-25%, just because it does allow you to reach those retirement goals. So that's one thing. And then the last thing, Drew, I wanted to, maybe to wrap up this entire section, other main section of the podcast, when we think about retirement, I think it's important to understand how much money you actually need to have to be able to retire. So really, really good rule of thumb, whether it holds true or not, it at least gives you a general idea of how much money you need to save. And that's the 4% rule. And what the 4% rule says is that you have so much amount of money at retirement. Let's just say it's $1 million in your retirement account. You can withdraw 4% of that per year and have a really good shot of never running out of money. It gets a little more technical than that. It talks about asset allocation. We won't go into that today. We've done an episode on that in the past. But if you have $1 million, if you have 4%, that means you can take home comfortably $40,000 per year, which $1 million taking home 40 doesn't seem like a lot, but it gives you an idea of, if you want to live on 80, you probably will need to have $2 million in your retirement accounts to be able to do that comfortably.
Yeah, and I think something that came to my mind as you said that is 40,000 doesn't seem like a lot of money off of a million, but we're hoping by the time that you've set up this retirement account and you've worked your way towards financial freedom, that you've gotten to the point where you don't really have these debts anymore. So once you have all your debts paid off, you don't have that mortgage, you don't have that student loans. The only thing you're really paying for is your utilities, your property taxes, and maybe just the rest goes towards entertainment and food and travel. So 40,000 might not seem like a lot of money, but when you don't have a bunch of debt, that 40,000 will actually go pretty far away. Second thing that comes to mind is don't be afraid to use Google. And there's so many programs out there and just quick calculators that you can actually help see like where you need to be in retirement, and you just punch in some simple information and you're there. Or if you had like a Mint app, it can be something that can really help you see what your net worth is, where your budget is, and actually helping you plan for the future. And thirdly, a software that Cavan really liked was we had Tyson on here from On Trajectory earlier on in the year, and he has a great piece of software that you can really put in just about any scenario possible, and you can really see how that will affect you in the future going forward, whether it is buying a $40,000 car compared to $60,000 car? How will that affect me when I'm at retirement? So don't be afraid to go on the internet and actually use these tools that are out there for you to help this decision and this process easier for you.
I think at the end of the day, it's just getting an understanding of how much money you need to live off of. And like you said, your living expenses should be considerably less. You need to be able to have your debts paid off or paid down when you get to that retirement age. Cause you're right, 40,000, 50, whatever it is can go a long ways when you're not paying for a mortgage, you're not paying for cars and all of that stuff. But I think generally speaking, just to recap all of these 7 different statistics, I truly believe it's just living intentional with your money, whether it's budgeting, whether it's paying down debt, or it's investing for your retirement and building a true, strong financial strategy to make you hit all of your goals. It's just that intentionality. It's taking time out of your day to plan, time out of your day to understand where your money is going. And then once you've got all that stuff, if you automate it, you can just live your life without having to think about it again.
What really pops out to me with this episode is the actual statistics themselves. And whether you listen to all of them or you didn't, it gives you, like I said, I need to have a starting point. It gives me a benchmark of seeing where everybody else is at, where am I at, and what are the steps I need to take to get past these statistics and be, some of the people that are more successful onto that. So being able to show statistics like this, I'm hoping you guys can be able to take these numbers and gives you a light bulb that goes off in your head and goes, I didn't realize that about this section or this section. And maybe I want to do a little bit more digging. Maybe I want to start this plan today. Maybe I want to start this budget today or this retirement account today. So we're hoping that through this episode that these numbers can kind of jump out at you. Not saying that if you're below these, it's a bad situation. It's just a starting point and that benchmark. Like I said, I'd love to have a starting point of to be able to say, this is where it's at. This is where I'm at. What can I do to improve my situation?
Drew, I got to be honest. I've been on a huge Twitter kick lately. Back in college, Twitter was kind of a bigger thing. It was a newer social media app.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of fell away from it as I moved more towards like a Facebook or now like TikTok, Instagram. Actually, I wasn't really ever into
What
Instagram
about
all that much.
MySpace?
Well, that was way back in the day. So I actually should see if I can get onto my MySpace because that would be a trip.
That would
Not
be
gonna lie. I wonder
hilarious.
what kind of song was on my page. I wonder who my top friends were.
Oh God, I would be cringing so hard if I went back and looked at my MySpace and see see top friends are, who the song was, what your background was. Ugh.
It was always so funny because your friends list would change depending on how you felt about certain people. So like if you were in a fight with someone, you might demote them to say like number 4 on your list, right? And it was always you always knew who was beefing at the time because of where you lined up on each other's MySpace friends
Just
lists.
walking around school, hey, you better choose your words wisely, otherwise I'm demoting you.
Yeah. You're gonna get off my friends list, and I don't know if you're
Yeah.
gonna get back on. But anyways, Drew, so today I was on Twitter before we came on. I was just killing some time before we got connected. And right now there's a new cryptocurrency bill that's going through Congress, specifically that was put out by Senator Gillibrand and Loomis. Politics aside, this
Out
isn't a
in New
political
York, I believe.
podcast. Yep. So this isn't a political podcast, but the cryptocurrency bill that was put forward got me super excited. And so Dennis Porter is a Bitcoin, I suppose you could say maximalist, but he basically is a Bitcoin guy, Twitter guy, social media guy. And he had a really good thread that summarized 3 of the main important Bitcoin aspects of this bill that I just thought would be fun to talk about because
Hmm.
we're both into cryptocurrency. I'm becoming more of a Bitcoin maximalist outside of all of the other coins. That's probably for a different day to dive into. But it's very exciting. So there's a bill. So the 3 things in this bill that comes from Dennis Porter's thread is the first one is in the bill, it says there's going to be no capital gains taxes or no taxes on transactions that are less than $200. And so, what that means, Drew, is that it makes this more of a viable form of currency, because when you are buying using Bitcoin, you no longer would be subject to capital gains tax and have to worry about all those repercussions of that.
You know, I it's a bill, so it's always a starting point to go back and forth on everything, and I'm sure this will be a sticking point for some people, but it's nice to start seeing some framework around cryptocurrencies and being able to, even though it's $200, to be able to transact with that without capital gains is really nice. Unfortunately, I think some of the stuff that you want to use that for is going to be more than $200. So it'll be interesting to see if that number jumps up or not. And, you know, with this bill, it's kind of interesting that this came out within like the last like day or two, because just last week, I believe it was, New York had pretty much a ban on Bitcoin mining. So that was kind of a back and forth of saying, I thought you guys were, that New York was against Bitcoin. Now this bill is trying to say there's some framework for your pro Bitcoin. Uh, so that'll be interesting too to see where that comes out of. It sounds like that mining one was targeted towards one company that was using a significant amount of energy, and it was supposedly an environmental ban to help, or in a ban to help the environment, because they didn't want one company using that much energy and having more and more companies to do that. But anyways, there's a bill going. Anyway, this bill is going on. It's nice that there's some framework and regulation, because as this moves forward, as it goes from state to state, is when you'll start seeing some of the big institutional money coming in. And then that's when you'll actually see those huge price spikes out of Bitcoin, in my opinion.
So two other aspects of the bill that I wanted to bring up real quick is the second one being you have the right to self custody, meaning that you can actually own your Bitcoin. You don't have to have it through a bank. Right now, think about like, well, if you go back like gold, you had to basically keep that stored at a bank. But Bitcoin, you'll have the right to self custody. And then the third thing is that, and this is more for the mining side, but right now miners, so the people that actually run the code to operate the system or to find more Bitcoin, when they mine Bitcoin, they're taxed when they mine it, and which is completely different than gold. So in the gold industry, when you mine gold, you're only taxed on it when you sell. This bill would make mining Bitcoin the exact same, which incentivizes miners. And you're probably like, why the heck does that even matter? Why do I care? Well, it makes it so that there's more incentives for miners to actually mine this, because they can mine and hold and then not have to, pay taxes instantly when they mine, which means that they would probably have to sell more Bitcoin. And depending on where markets were, they might have to pay capital gains. They might have to take big losses. There's just less noise and less complexity is now there with this bill. I shouldn't say now it's not finalized, right? But with this bill, the fact that they won't have to pay taxes until they actually sell it. So those are three big things for Bitcoin. There's obviously more to this bill when it gets, looking at the broader cryptocurrency spectrum. But generally speaking, I'm just super optimistic about it because, like you said, this is like the first real legislation that is being introduced, and it is pretty bipartisan. Um, the fact that there's a lot of support on both left and right side for, I shouldn't say a lot, there's support on both left and right side of the aisle. But it's really encouraging and exciting that this is starting to get into legislation and the conversations are happening, because without that, we probably wouldn't see more adoption of Bitcoin or other type of cryptocurrencies.
I'd like to maybe read a little bit more into that self custody part of it, that right of self custody, because when I hear that, it's kind of laughable to me, because the whole part of decentralized finances is to be anonymous, and it's your money, it's not anybody else's. So the fact that they're trying to say, like, we're going to allow you for that to be your money, I think is kind of laughable, because it is your money. Like, you
Yeah.
don't have to tell me it's my money. And
Yeah.
there's a reason why we made decentralized finance, is because we didn't have the right to our money before.
Right.
So
Right.
I think that part's kind of funny on it.
It's comical, but at the same time, like if they didn't allow right to self custody, that kind of throws out the whole decentralized aspect, anyways. And then you wouldn't be able to use decentralized money for, you know, basically purchases in the country that bans it. So
As far as
from
like
that
big
standpoint, it is promising.
Yeah, as far as like the big corporations, that type of stuff, but the whole with DeFi, I think there's still all that decentralizations will say all be peer to peer type of items. So it'd have to be like, I guess, kind of just like the cash black market that we have right now in some of the companies. So that's pretty much how it interact. But maybe this also gives some framework for a lot of these crypto wallets to have a nice on and off ramp and a more affordable on and off ramp to go into fiat. Because I think the Bitcoin maximalist would probably say that fiat's going out the window; it'll never be around. But the fact and the reality of during the next, probably 50 years or more, it will probably have some type of centralized money and decentralized money, and you need to be able to have legal framework to be able to put fiat onto crypto and take fiat out of crypto. And I think right now a lot of people are tiptoeing around that because they don't want to get handcuffed by the SEC. So that could be part of that. That could be part of that framework there. But the last thing I would have to say about this bill is I would have a hard time seeing many politicians being anti-Bitcoin going forward in the next couple of years. I think it's going to be such a cultural movement that if you're not saying you're pro Bitcoin or pro cryptocurrencies, you're not going to get the voters that you initially wanted.
Yeah, and honestly, this is becoming a single issue for a lot of voters, similar to what other single issues are. We won't go into them, but the fact of Bitcoin and crypto, that's going to be a single issue for voters. And I think you're totally right. I think politicians are going to have to be on the pro Bitcoin, pro crypto side if they want to remain in office. And in my opinion, that's a really good thing because I really love this technology and I think it's going to do a lot of good in the world. But besides that, Drew, that's what's going on in my neighborhood. Or I suppose what's going on in my neighborhood. I just thought it would be something interesting to bring up because we've talked about crypto and Bitcoin in the past, and I just like talking about it. I thought it was really interesting. I'm excited about the bill, the legislation, and to see how it revolves from here. But with that, what's going on over in your neighborhood this week?
I had a pretty awesome weekend in Duluth. We went. It was my wife and her dad and and his wife. Sorry, um, and we went out fishing on Superior for some trout and salmon, and that was just awesome. And they kept us up at or kept us at their hotel that was like 3 bedroom, like 2 bath, had a little sauna in and everything. So that was really awesome. You just had to go right down to the bottom. You could go right out towards the charter boat the next day. So that was like really awesome. Very thankful that we were able to go do that. And then we were away from the baby for a night, and then he showed up the next day after he got done fishing, and it was good to see the baby back. But that night was kind of a nightmare. He popped a front tooth that we didn't realize, and it was probably one of the worst nights of sleep I think he's ever had. And it just sucks because there's nothing you can do. You're trying to say what's upsetting you. You're trying to give him some numbing gel or ibuprofen, or maybe he's hungry, change his diaper, gave him some food. Nothing would help him. He'd be crying for like an hour. So that was, I know it was not a great night's sleep for me, but I know he's probably much more pain. So, but he bopped a tooth, and last night he slept a little bit better. So I'm hoping he continues to sleep better until another tooth pops through, and then I'm sure that'll be all over again.
I got to be honest. Maybe we're just very lucky, but we never had the teething issues, the teething traumas, I guess you could say that you experience and a lot of other parents experience. Which man, I could not be more grateful because we've had her cries at night. Don't get me wrong, but the fact that there's just literally nothing you can do, and you're just like, and like it, what do you say is like an hour, but that hour probably felt like 6, right?
Yeah, and then we're in a hotel, so we're like, are we waking up everybody else? And sometimes at home, if he like wakes up at night, part of like the training stuff is you don't go in there right away, but you're in a hotel, so you're like, I kind of need to go in there right away to make sure that I'm not waking people in the hotel room plus the people next door, upstairs, etc. But that was my weekend. It was really fun. We had a great weekend there. We had some good food. I think I'm gonna have some of the salmon tonight for dinner. We're gonna barbecue that up, and I don't know what we'll have for the sides, but that's pretty much what's going on in my neighborhood. And I think with that, we probably can end up wrapping up this week's episode of the Neighborhood Money Podcast. Very fun episode here. It really brings to light these huge statistics that are going on in the world and our economy right now, anywhere from budgeting to emergency funds to debts, big purchases, and most importantly, retirement and how you want to live that way. So I hope this episode gave you some knowledge. I hope you gained some knowledge. I hope you enjoy this. If you did, give us a like, give us a subscribe, give us a follow. And with all that said, we'll see you next week in the neighborhood.